This is the Coronavirus Morning Report for Friday, April 10th, 2020. I'm Brian McCullough. First, there were concerns about reinfection. Now there is worrying new data about disease reactivation. We're falling behind in terms of having enough supplies to test adequately to allow people to return to work. A follow-up on California's coronavirus curve and testing program there. A look at Easter weekend coming up. And the veterinarian being hailed as a hero for saving an entire nation. Confirmed infections globally have passed 1.5 million people, and we will pass the 100,000 fatality mark either today or certainly this weekend. Cases of the virus have now been confirmed in 177 countries. The governor of Tokyo has broken with the broader government decrees in his nation by asking for businesses like nightclubs, gyms, and movie theaters to close. For the first time in history, all of the pubs in Great Britain are closed, quoting the New York Times. During the two world wars, sometimes there was a shortage of beer and the pubs had to close for that reason, said Paul Jennings, a historian and author of several books about pub culture and alcohol consumption in Britain. He added that some pubs, particularly those in London, may have closed during the Great Plague of 1665, but that, quote, there is no real precedent for closing all of them like this, end quote. New York State reported 799 more deaths yesterday, another daily record. But Governor Cuomo said hospitalizations have slowed, and if that continues, the number of people in hospitals will soon decline. And that's an important distinction to note. Even in New York, what we are seeing right now is still decelerating growth in numbers. Notice my emphasis on the word growth. Even when we report good numbers like these, we are still saying that we saw 200 more people in the hospital yesterday than we did the day before. Thousands more people were hospitalized this week than last. Yes, it's good news that the growth in hospitalizations is shrinking, but that doesn't mean we have cause for celebration yet. We still haven't seen a day where there were less people in the hospital than the day before. That is the sort of good news number that we should be on the lookout for, because that would be truly good news and a sign we are actually turning the corner. Along those lines, stray observation going into the weekend that the data shows that both Italy and Spain seem to have flattened their curves, but they are still reporting thousands of new infections each day, so that would mean hundreds of new deaths are still in the pipeline for the coming weeks. This is not something that will end overnight, is what I'm trying to stress. For example, there are currently still 29,000 current active cases in Lombardy alone. Even if all of those cases recover, it will be weeks before they do so. So a reminder that, again, even when numbers turn in our favor, that does not mean the tragedy ends with the flip of a switch. And first, it was fears of low levels of antibodies leaving some people susceptible to reinfection. But now there is worrying new data from South Korea that some coronavirus cases might be reactivating. Quoting Bloomberg, about 51 patients classed as having been cured in South Korea have tested positive again, the CDC said in a briefing on Monday. Rather than being infected again, the virus may have been reactivated in these people, given they tested positive again shortly after being released from quarantine, said Jong-un Kyung, Director General of the Korean CDC. Quote, while we are putting more weight on reactivation as the possible cause, we are conducting a comprehensive study on this, Jong said. There have been many cases when a patient during treatment will test negative one day and positive another, end quote. Fear of reinfection in recovered patients is also growing in China, where the virus first emerged last December, after reports that some tested positive again and even died from the disease after supposedly recovering and leaving hospital. There's little understanding of why this happens, although some believe that the problem may lie in inconsistencies in test results, end quote. The concern is that the virus might be hiding in so-called reservoirs inside the body, sort of like how HIV does. Or perhaps people are simply being reinfected once they leave hospital. Whatever the case, the number of reactivations/recurrences in South Korea is increasing daily. There were 51 cases on April 6th, 71 on April 9th, and 91 reported just today. Back to New York City. This is not happening in city parks, as we feared, but video has emerged of contract workers burying the bodies of unclaimed coronavirus victims on Hart Island. Quoting the Washington Post, The island, a 1-mile strip off the Bronx, accessible only by boat, serves as the final resting place for more than 1 million former New Yorkers, those who died without known next of kin or whose families could not afford a funeral. Normally, about 25 corpses are buried on the island each week by low-paid inmates at Rikers Island, the city's notorious jail complex, but with a 5-fold increase in bodies and a virus outbreak at the jail, the city has turned to contract employees instead. Jason Kirsten, a spokesman for the city's Department of Correction, told Reuters that about 24 people are now being buried daily, 5 times a week. 2 new trenches have been excavated by digging machines to accommodate the uptick in deaths, end quote. And the country of Turkey is enacting just the sort of cell phone-based tracking system for infected patients that we spoke about earlier this week. Quote, the program in Turkey, called the Pandemic Isolation Tracking Project, sends warning messages to the phones of infected people if they violate quarantine guidelines. If they do not return to isolation, necessary administrative measures and sanctions will be implemented, the state-run Anadolu news agency said, adding that patients' data will not be used for any other purposes, end quote. Participation in the program appeared to be mandatory. Turkey's health minister, Flattened said Tuesday that infected patients would be required to download an application to use on their phones. Turkey is struggling to contain one of the fastest-growing coronavirus outbreaks in the world. Nearly 40,000 people have tested positive for the virus, and 812 have died, according to the latest ministry figures, end quote. Of course, all the caveats in the world about privacy concerns and fears that governments might use tools like these to spy on and surveil their populace. As we keep saying, testing has been and will continue to be the most crucial thing we can be doing right now, especially as we think about how to reopen society. Unfortunately, we're still not doing enough of it here in the U.S., according to Dr. Ashish Jha, the director of the Harvard Global Health Institute. The good doctor shared some numbers on testing in a Twitter thread earlier this week. He also explained why the numbers are alarming, and I think it's important we all really understand this, so I'm going to quote the whole thread. Quote, 2 weeks ago, we tested about 100,000 people a day. Today, we tested 135,000. That's a measly 35% increase in 2 weeks. During that time, the number of cases has increased nearly 500%. The number of new daily cases has increased 82%, and the percentage of positive cases has gone from 17% to 23%. So we have fallen behind in the last 2 weeks. Instead of ramping up vigorously and getting ahead of the virus, testing is falling behind. Social distancing is good, it is helpful, it is helping. But I'd argue our lousy testing capacity is making social distancing less effective. Because we can't identify and quarantine all those who are infected, they continue to spread disease, just less so because of social distancing. And with this kind of testing capacity, without a lot greater testing, there is no way we can safely open up again. So I know tweets about testing are getting boring, but testing is the linchpin for getting our lives back. No, testing alone won't be enough, but it is essential. I wrote about it in Forbes today. The barriers are plenty, not enough swabs, reagents, PPEs, infrastructure, etc., but each is surmountable. Some states are doing it. More need to. Congress should put real money towards incentives for testing in the next stimulus. This is how we get our lives back, end quote. To elaborate on some of those last points, Dr. Jha wrote in Forbes, quote, while we don't know the exact number of tests needed to safely reopen most of our economy and society, we know it's a lot more than what we're doing right now. We need enough to test everyone who has symptoms and their contacts, as well as a sample of the people who are asymptomatic to know how much silent disease we are missing. Given that we are largely testing only symptomatic people, we probably need to triple our testing capacity, maybe even more. Testing on this scale, about 500,000 people daily, is well within our capacity, and as the disease burden comes down, so will the number of tests we need to perform, end quote. Like Dr. Jha said on Twitter, we're critically lacking in supplies like PPE, test swabs, and reagents used to detect the presence of the virus, as well as the infrastructure to roll out mass testing, by which I mean actual boots on the ground, actual people, including public health workers assigned to track down contacts, but also instructing people about quarantines. But Dr. Jha believes there are ways we can make all of that possible with the assistance of the government. Quote, in the short run, the federal government could offer financial support or guarantee payment for companies producing tests. The federal government needs to play a critical role in coordination and distribution. Some states have adequate swabs, but not enough reagents. Other states may be missing swabs, but have enough reagents. We must find ways to move supplies around so that states get what they need when they need it. Only the federal government can play this coordinating role, end quote. Dr. Jha concludes with the same reminder we have been harping on over and over again. Quote, if we open up without being prepared, the number of cases of COVID-19 will spike. Hospitals will become overwhelmed, and we will have to shut down again for even longer. We don't have to choose that path. Other countries have shown us that it's possible to fight COVID-19 without a widespread lockdown. But to safely do so, we must catalyze a massive investment in and scale up of our testing infrastructure. And we must do it now. The health of our society and economy depend on making testing a priority, end quote. And let me just give you a tangible, real-world example of why we need to do this. If we're going to lift lockdown restrictions, we need to have sufficient testing and contact tracing in place to prevent things like this. Cook County Jail in Chicago has been linked to more than 400 coronavirus cases, which makes it the largest known source of infections in the United States, not including medical facilities. Quoting the New York Times, the Cook County Sheriff's Office, which operates the jail, said Wednesday that 238 inmates and 115 staff members have tested positive for the virus. But those figures most likely downplay the actual problem, the jail acknowledged, because the vast majority of the jail's 4,500 inmates have not been tested, end quote. And while Cook County Jail is the most extreme case, this isn't an isolated problem. Quoting again, the New York Times has identified at least 1,324 confirmed coronavirus cases tied to U.S. prisons and jails, including at least 32 deaths. Those numbers are most likely a vast undercount because some states and local agencies have not released information, and others, including the Federal Bureau of Prisons, which has had 337 positive cases and 8 deaths, are not testing everyone who falls ill, end quote. If we try to go back to normal too soon or without any testing precautions, without contact tracing, we could very well see outbreaks where just one case in the wrong location shuts down an entire city once again. This is the point. One single case, one single location, a jail, a church, a bar, a backyard barbecue could be enough in the coming months to cause a localized outbreak to reoccur and force an entire city back into lockdown. But, and this is the big but to be watching out for in the next few months, if we can immediately act on any outbreaks like this, only those exposed would need to go back into isolation. The rest of us could continue to cautiously be out and about, but only if we know when these things happen and act quickly. After starting to make headway on their substantial backlog of tests this week, and establishing a task force to fill a perceived void left by the federal government, things might be cautiously looking up in California. Though, like in all places, a leveling out of cases doesn't necessarily mean life will go back to normal anytime soon. It just means that social distancing is working in California, and that we'll probably have to keep it up in one form or another for a little bit longer there. Quoting the LA Times, California is beginning to see guarded progress in its fight against the coronavirus, with a slower spread in infections and the number of deaths, while rising rapidly, lagging significantly behind hotspots like New York and Italy. Dr. Robert Kim Farley, medical epidemiologist and infectious disease expert at the UCLA Fielding School of Public Health, said the flatter curve in new coronavirus cases likely means far fewer deaths than experts once feared, because hospitals won't be overwhelmed by patients and have to ration care. But keeping it that way also means extended periods of social distancing, end quote. Dr. Jeffrey Smith, Santa Clara County Executive Officer, says we would be lucky to see sports games resuming as soon as Thanksgiving. London Breed, the San Francisco mayor, says schools are unlikely to open again this academic year, and the Pride Parade in June will most likely not happen without major changes. Governor Newsom has said the state is working hard to expand testing, including serology tests and community surveillance testing, to get an idea of when California may be able to lift some lockdown restrictions. And what might even a partial reopening look like in California? Quoting the LA Times again, possible ideas include keeping schools closed, suggesting masks be worn outdoors, extending a ban on mass gatherings, and keeping older people sheltered in place. Perhaps only a fraction of people or only certain industries might return to their physical workplace initially, end quote. Dr. Howard Markle, a professor of the history of medicine at the University of Michigan, said in a webinar last month, quote, "If you pull the triggers off too early, not only is there a circulating virus to do what it naturally does, but you will have incurred all the economic and social disruptions of stay-at-home orders for nothing," end quote. What we're seeing in California is what we'll likely see in every location that starts getting serious outbreaks relatively under control, a sustained effort to keep it under control, even as people may view the threat as having passed, and even as scientists and governments scramble to produce the necessary testing and tracing measures. Again, these peaks we're seeing this week, the gradual decline in the curves, are not the end of the story. We are not even close to out of the woods yet, and if we mistake that, we risk only falling deeper back in the hole. Spending more time inside and alone than usual, it's easy to get stuck in anxious thought loops, like worst-case scenarios, what-ifs, ruminating about the past or projecting into the future. With social distancing, we need support now more than ever. Talkspace Online Therapy gives you the support you deserve on a schedule that works for you. Talkspace lets you match with a licensed therapist from the safety of your home. Get 24/7 messaging access to your therapist on any device and hear back daily. Talkspace therapists have experience treating a range of issues, including depression, anxiety, substance abuse, trauma, relationship issues, food and eating, and more. Security, safety, and privacy are top priorities at Talkspace. Their platform encrypts and securely stores all client information using the same technology used by the banking industry. We all need to talk through life's challenges. Talkspace offers the support we deserve at a price we can afford. Match with your perfect therapist and get $100 off your first month with promo code BRIEFING. Sign up at Talkspace.com or download the app. Don't forget to use promo code BRIEFING for $100 off your first month. Obviously, for all our sakes, we need to avoid crowds in any way we can right now. But what if you need to go to the post office? What if you need postage to send out letters and packages? Don't worry, Stamps.com is here to help. Anything you can do at the post office, you can do at Stamps.com. Print postage on demand and skip those lines and crowds at the post office. Stamps.com brings all the services of the U.S. Postal Service right to your computer in the safety and comfort of your own home, office, or anywhere else you're hunkering down right now. Whether you're a small business sending invoices, an online seller shipping out products, or you're just working from home and need to mail stuff, Stamps.com can handle it all with ease. Simply use your computer to print official U.S. postage 24/7 for any letter, any package, any class of mail, anywhere you want to send it. Once your mail is ready, just leave it for your mail carrier, schedule a free package pickup, or drop it in a mailbox. No human contact required. It's that simple. Right now, our listeners get a special offer that includes a 4-week trial plus free postage and a digital scale without any long-term commitment. Just go to Stamps.com, click on the microphone at the top of the homepage, and type in briefing. That's Stamps.com, enter briefing. Stay safe, my friends. With Easter this weekend, Passover ongoing, and Ramadan beginning later this month, lots of religious communities around the world are coming up with new ways to observe holy days during lockdown. Many are using platforms like Zoom to hold services or connect with family for the holidays. A lot of faith leaders have happily adapted to virtual events, citing their need to model behavior, and using the unprecedented moment as an opportunity to demonstrate the strength and nimbleness of their faiths. Others, however, continue to hold services, sometimes in direct opposition to state or county regulations. Florida, Michigan, Ohio, and Kansas all have provisions for religious services in their social distancing mandates, but in states and counties where religious services are not considered essential, some have claimed it's a violation of religious liberty to cancel religious in-person events. People of many different faiths have continued to hold services, gather for holidays, and create petitions for services to go on despite the pandemic. Even for those who are compliant with social distancing guidelines, Elizabeth Burke, a cantor at Anshi Emmett Synagogue in Chicago, notes there are real concerns about some individuals who may not feel comfortable using or even owning the technology required to tune in. Burke says there are also debates within the conservative Jewish movement about whether live streaming technology is allowed. on Shabbat. As for the Catholic Church, Pope Francis's Easter Mass will be closed to the public for the first time in modern history, but it will be available via live stream. As an octogenarian who is also missing part of a lung, the Pope is a very high-risk individual, and 8 employees inside the Vatican have already tested positive for coronavirus, including 1 in the residence hall where Francis lives. Quoting an anonymous Vatican official in the Washington Post, quote, "Let's hope he doesn't catch it. Can you imagine a conclave in a time of epidemic? It would look like a sci-fi Vatican novel," end quote. And finally today, the story of a veterinary scientist who adapted his salmon testing lab to test for viral disease in humans. He's being hailed as a hero for helping the Faroe Islands, a self-governing territory within the Kingdom of Denmark, avoid a single coronavirus death so far. Debes Christensen of the National Reference Laboratory for Fish and Animal Diseases in the capital of Tórshavn warned the Faroe Islands government as early as January of the need to test, track, and quarantine people with COVID-19, quoting from The Guardian. His laboratory, which was primarily geared to test salmon for viral infection, was adapted, and he purchased the extra ingredients required to test humans. There has been mass testing for virus among salmon farmed in Faroese waters since an outbreak of salmon anemia virus in 2001 ravaged the species. Quoting from The Guardian, his laboratory, which was primarily geared to test salmon for viral infection, was adapted for, and he purchased the extra ingredients required to test humans. There has been mass testing for virus among salmon farmed in Faroese waters since an outbreak of salmon anemia virus in 2001 ravaged the species. Of the archipelago's total export value, 90% is accounted for by fish, and half of that is salmon. According to official records, 10% of the Faroese population of 61,000 people have now been tested for the coronavirus by Dr. Christensen's lab. Faroese doctors have been able to track and quarantine everyone who has had contact with the 184 people who had tested positive for the virus there. Of those who have fallen ill, 131 have fully recovered, end quote. Christensen told the paper that his lab had been easy to adapt. The only thing I changed were some of the ingredients. In our normal work, it is specific to fish virus and fish bacteria, and in this case, I just changed the 3 components specific to the coronavirus, end quote. The Faroe Islands is just one of 3 European countries that has thus far avoided COVID-19 deaths, the others being Georgia and Liechtenstein. Christina Hafoss, an opposition MP who was the country's finance minister until 2019, praised Christensen's quick action and told The Guardian, quote, "If we had had to send the tests to Denmark for analysis, it takes days and up to a week to get them back, and it wouldn't have been possible to control the disease the way we have done. Tracking and tracing has been a very important part. It has been possible to trace all the people who have been tested positive and who they have been with, and they have been put in quarantine for 2 weeks," end quote. As always, this show was produced by Ride Home Media, written by Brian McCullough, Jackson Bird, and James Welsh, edited by Jackson Bird. We'll be back with you on Monday. Be well, everyone.